With the exception of the iPhone 4 and 5, I've used every new iPhone from the 3G. And with every new iPhone line, there has usually been one key-selling feature. The XS had a Max model, the 11 had the ultra-wide camera, the 12 had a flat-frame redesign, but you see, the 13 doesn't actually have one major key-selling feature. It has three smaller ones, which combined make the 13 Pro what is, in my opinion, the perfect iPhone. But the real question is, could this also be the perfect phone? Well, let's find out. Okay, so right before I started testing the 13 Pro, I was convinced that the biggest key-selling feature by far would be the camera improvements, but I was wrong. It is actually the battery. So you know how the iPhone's poor battery life is a meme at this point? Companies like Samsung have started literally making ads that show iPhone users having to carry around power banks or constantly having to find a power socket. And this was indeed the case for many years, as the Android competition has almost always had bigger phones with bigger batteries, which as a result would last for longer. Well, all of this actually ended with the introduction of the iPhone 11 Pro Max, which had the biggest battery in an iPhone yet. This phone could even last me for 2 days, which not even the best Android phones at that time could. However, when Apple introduced the iPhone 12 line last year, they also made them thinner, which in turn made the battery smaller, and hence the 12 line didn't last as long as the 11. But this year, Apple made them thicker again. They added the biggest batteries that the iPhones have ever had, and combined with the more efficient Apple A15 chip, we now have the longest lasting iPhone battery yet. So how good is it? Well, with heavy usage, which is basically me using my iPhone for the entirety of my day, it was able to last me up until around 9 p.m. My 12 Pro used to be dead by 3 p.m., so massive improvement here. And with light usage, which is usually during the week when I only use it in the morning and when I'm back from work, it was not only able to last me for the entire day, but the following morning it still had up to 40% battery left. My 12 Pro would usually die by 8 p.m. the day before. This pretty much matches what my 11 Pro Max used to get, and that's great because I no longer have to buy the biggest iPhone in order to get a great battery life. Oh, and if you want to see a more detailed battery test, we've actually done one recently where we tested exactly how much battery you would lose in 1 hour of doing a specific task. Now, aside from the bigger battery and the more efficient chip, there is one more thing that makes the battery last for so long, and that is the new display. More specifically, Apple is now using an LTPO OLED panel, which is more power efficient and also more responsive than before. Most Android phones have 2 steps for the screen refresh rate, 60 Hz and either 90 or 120. Phones with 2 steps don't have a dynamic refresh rate, so if you wanted to change it from 120 down to 60, you would have to manually do that in the settings. Some higher-end Android phones like the Note 20 Ultra, the Galaxy S20 Ultra, and a few more, they can dynamically adjust, and they support 4 steps: 48 Hz, 60 Hz, 96, and 120. The iPhone 13 Pros can also be dynamically adjustable, and they support 12 steps: 10 Hz, 12, 15, 16, 20, 24, 30, 40, 48, 60, 80, and 120. Which means that when you're watching a 30 frames per second video on YouTube, the iPhone's display would refresh at 30 Hz, whereas something like the Galaxy S21 Ultra would refresh at 48 Hz, as that's the lowest that it can go, and the Xiaomi Mi 11 would refresh at 120 Hz, as that display has a 2-step refresh rate. This does explain why the battery lasts for so long, as the display itself, even though it is more fluid, it is also more power efficient. So I think the next question to ask is the 120 Hz refresh rate worth it? Is it that more fluid? This is actually a very difficult one to answer, as when you're using Apple-made apps, it absolutely is. But when you're using third-party apps, they first need to be updated in order to display their animations at 120 frames per second. Apple states that this only applies to animations and not scrolling, but when I was using some third-party apps, I actually noticed that scrolling was also very choppy, and in some cases, they seem to be running at 20 frames per second or so. So I really hope that this gets fixed soon. Fun fact, if you want to fix it now, you can just enable low power mode, which will limit the display to a maximum of 60 Hz, which does actually seem to make things a bit better. By the way, my Z Fold 3, which also has an LTPO 120 Hz display, albeit with 4 supported refresh rate steps, rather than 12, it doesn't have this issue. So right now, the main advantage of having 120 Hz is not actually the fluidity of the display, but rather the battery savings that it provides thanks to that dynamic refresh rate. Now, the display is also brighter, as it can reach 1000 nits compared to 800 of before. However, this only works in auto brightness and only when there's a lot of ambient light. So if you try to bump up the brightness manually, it would still top up at just slightly over 800 nits. Have I really noticed this outdoors? I have. The 13 Pro was perfectly readable even in bright daytime conditions, and it was definitely a visible improvement over my 12 Pro. Speaking of being outdoors, let's talk about the camera, as this is what you're all probably here for. But before we do that, I just want to say that if you just got your new iPhone 13 or even an iPhone 12, you need to try out ESR, our sponsor for this video. ESR has their unique Halo Lock magnetic mounting system, which doesn't just work with MagSafe, but ESR's Halo Lock accessories too. Their Halo Lock iPhone 13 case offers military-grade drop protection that's reinforced on the corners, plus a camera guard that always keeps your camera lenses raised so that they never touch any surface. And since this is a Halo Lock case, you can not only connect it to MagSafe accessories, but also ESR's own Halo Lock accessories, such as the Halo Lock wireless car charger that allows you to easily and quickly charge your iPhone and supports strong magnets that can take up to 900 grams of weight, which is more than Apple's own MagSafe charger. My favorite one though is ESR's Halo Lock kickstand wireless charger that is both a portable magnetic wireless charger that you can easily carry with you, as well as a stand to prop up your iPhone for when you're viewing content. And it features a removable USB Type-C cable that you can easily replace in case it gets damaged. Check out ESR's iPhone accessories by using the link below. And now, back to the video. My favorite thing about the 13 Pro's camera by far is that even if you buy the 13 Pro, you will still get the exact same experience as with a 13 Pro Max. Whereas last year, you had to buy the 12 Pro Max to get the best camera. But okay, what are the actual camera improvements that we got this year? Well, the main one is that all three camera modules on the back, the wide, the ultra-wide, and the telephoto, are now better in low light, so you get less noise and an overall cleaner image, which is especially noticeable when you take a look at low-light video. However, the low-light improvements in photos, well, definitely there, they weren't as big as I was hoping. And that's actually because the 13 Pro will consistently use a shorter exposure time than the 12 Pro in order to get a sharper image. The problem with this is that in some cases, the 13 Pro's night shots will end up looking darker than the 12 Pro's. So if you're not a fan of this, I do have a pro tip. You can simply slide the exposure slider up, which will allow you to extend the night mode timer for even longer, and this would result in noticeably brighter night shots. Aside from low light, the second camera improvement is macro mode, which is done via the new autofocus capability of the ultra-wide module. Again, this isn't anything new, as Android phones have had macro modules for quite some time now, and some Android phones can actually focus much closer than Apple can, but this is still a very good macro. My only complaint here is that there is no on-off switch. Instead, it will automatically switch when it detects a close-up subject, and sometimes when the object is very thin and there is also a lot of depth behind it in the background, it would get confused and constantly switch macro on and off. Now, Apple did state that they will be adding a switch in the future, but as of right now, there isn't one. And the final camera hardware improvement is that we now have 3x optical zoom as opposed to the 2.5x that the 12 Pro Max had last year, or the 2x that the 12 Pro had. Apple's 3x is very good actually, it being the sharpest 3x lens that I've ever tested, but I was hoping for something more here, as we have phones that have 5x or even 10x optical zoom lenses, and the difference between those and the iPhone 13 Pro is very noticeable. Really, my only complaint in terms of the camera quality is that some photos tend to end up overexposed when it comes to the highlights. I do hope that this gets fixed in a future software update, as phones like the Galaxy S21 Ultra tend to handle bright highlights much better. Now, we also get 3 camera software improvements, which unfortunately are exclusive to the iPhone 13 line. And these are photo styles, cinematic mode, and ProRes video, which is only available on the Pro models, although that's not available just yet. Photo styles allows you to have presets of how you want your photos to be taken. Now, the difference between these and filters is that photo styles are applied before you take a shot, whereas filters are applied after you take a shot, meaning that once you've selected the photo style, you cannot change that in post. Whereas with filters, you can just remove it or change it to another one even after you've taken the shot. So why would you use photo styles then? Well, since the settings are applied before you take the shot, in theory, the photos should retain more detail in them. although I haven't really been able to tell a major difference between the two. My issue with photo styles is that we only get 5, and you can only adjust the tone and the warmth. Also, the name of the preset would automatically change based on the settings that you have, which can make it quite confusing to use. I would have much preferred to have a pro camera mode instead that would allow us to change things such as the aperture, the ISO, and have different picture profiles in there. As right now, I do find photo styles to be very basic and not making as much of a difference as I was hoping they would. And if you want that, you will need to get an app like Holiday, which allows you to adjust all of those settings. When it comes to cinematic mode, at the Apple event, they mostly showed the smart focus transitions, but it's really just the portrait mode video, one that I find to be in its very early stages, as the edge detection is nowhere near as good as it is in portrait mode photos. But when you think about the fact that the iPhone processes 30 portrait mode photos every single second, that is really impressive, even though the photos are only 2 megapixels in size and the resulting video is just 1080p 30. I think that the best part about cinematic mode is not what it can do now, but what it will be able to do in the future, as I can probably bet that the 2022 iPhone will support 1080p 60 cinematic mode, and then the one after that might even be able to do 4K 30. Edge detection will improve, and we'll get to a point where it would just be as good as portrait mode is now with photos. And eventually, when it gets really good, it might even be difficult to tell the difference between a video taken with a professional camera and one taken with an iPhone. But I do think that we're still about 4 to 5 years away from that. Okay, so up until this point, it is pretty clear that the 13 Pro is the perfect iPhone. It's got a true all-day battery life, Apple's best display by far, and their best cameras, while also having a compact form factor that's easily usable in one hand. But at the start of this video, I had a question, which was, could the iPhone 13 Pro also be the perfect phone? And my answer to that is almost. It is very close, but it's not quite there yet. Whenever I take a look at the Android competition, there is one word that comes into my mind: courage. The ZTE Axon 20 5G was the first phone with an under-display camera. Apple's still using a notch in 2021. It is 20% smaller than before, but even that isn't enough, as it still takes up a lot of space and we don't actually get any extra icons thanks to it being smaller. The Huawei P30 Pro already had 5x optical zoom in 2019, and Apple has only just added 3x in 2021. The Xiaomi 11T Pro supports 120-watt fast charging that can fully charge the phone in just 17 minutes. The iPhone 13 Pro still takes close to 2 hours, and even though quick charging is fine, just over 50% in 30 minutes, most Android phones out there have a much faster quick charge. Not even to mention that Apple still hasn't added an always-on display, despite the 13 Pro having an LTPO panel. The Apple Watch, which also has an LTPO panel by the way, does have always-on functionality. Now, my guess here is that Apple hasn't added it on the iPhone, as it can only go as low as 10 Hz, whereas the Apple Watch can go as low as 1 Hz. But when you take a look at the Android market, you realize that there are phones that do have an always-on display that have nowhere near a 10 Hz refresh rate, and instead they have 60 Hz or 48 Hz as the lowest, yet they still have an all-day battery life. It took Apple 4 years to add 120 Hz, another 4 years to increase the zoom level, 7 years to add OLED, and 13 years to add widgets and an app drawer equivalent. So it is pretty clear that Apple is no longer the company that introduces the technology first, like they did with multi-touch, the Retina display, or the 3D depth sensing Face ID camera. They are at a point now where they would rather wait 10 years to add a feature that Android phones have already had for years, just because they think they can make it perfect. And I think there's only so much you can wait. If you're hoping that a 13 Pro is this super innovative phone, it is surely not that. If you're looking for that, get a Z Fold 3. What a 13 Pro is, however, is the best iPhone that Apple has ever made by far. In my eyes, even superior to the 13 Pro Max due to its more compact form factor. It is a safe bet for not just Apple, but also consumers who want a traditional smartphone that does everything right. Aside from the software, which is still confusing AF, like why do we have 2 ways of activating the camera from the lock screen, or duplicated toggles in the camera app? Yeah, iOS definitely needs loads of improvements, but when it comes to the 13 Pro, I don't think you can go wrong with it. Just like you can go wrong with subscribing to our channel if you want to see our upcoming iPhone 13 Pro Max versus Pixel 6 Pro camera comparison. In case you missed our previous camera comparison, you can find it right here. I'm Daniel, this has been Zenophtech, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Zenophtech, signing out. Cheers.